I'd like to welcome everybody back to Money Mixology. My name is Jason Moore. I'm your host. This is a show about the way psychology impacts your finances. We like to talk through about some of the crazy things you might be doing, some of the stuff your brain is doing that's making your financial life a little more difficult, and just chat about some of the quirks and things going on and some of the goofy stuff that we tend to do. I do have a guest today, so I want to jump right into it. I'm really excited about today's episode because this gentleman has a book that kind of drives right into the heart of what this show is about. So I'm going to introduce Dr. John Dinsmore. I'll let you introduce yourself here in a minute, but he is a professor here with me at the university, and so I'm going to let you jump in and kind of give your background for us if you can.
Okay. Hi, my name is John Dinsmore. I am a marketing professor here at Wright State's College of Business. Mostly I teach digital marketing and intro to marketing and strategy. And I recently published a book called The Marketing of Debt, How They Get You, that goes into all of the kind of irrational behaviors and decision making that we have that's related to evaluating debt.
Awesome. So just real quickly, because the listeners want to know, where can we get the book?
Any place online where books are sold.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right. So obviously Amazon would be our primary one,
Amazon,
right?
Target.
Yeah. Okay. If you're currently boycotting Amazon, go to Target.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. And one of the reasons that I was so excited to have you on the show was how well your expertise dovetails into what we talk about. And so one of the things that I often discuss with the audience and I discuss with my students in class is this idea that there are experts out there who have been trained on the psychology stuff that understand the sort of predictable ways that we are irrational, which sounds sort of oxymoronic, but it does work. And because of that, companies out there will hire people such as ourselves to manipulate the consumer in a variety of ways. And on this show, I've talked about Kohl's Cash a whole bunch of times because it's just sort of a silly example of this, but Kohl's has got it down pat. But yours is more specific to the debt side. And so I do want to kind of jump into this a little bit and have you give us an idea of sort of where we're coming with it. So you talk about people being predisposed to misunderstand debt. Can you give me an idea of what you mean there? Explain that for us.
Yeah. So if you sort of take a 360-degree look at the debt decision, um, we tend to underestimate the actual cost of the debt because interest rates are complex. Most people think they understand how interest rates work, and they generally don't. And then we tend to overestimate our ability to pay. When we think in the future, even just a few months in the future, we tend to think of, oh, well, I'll have more money then, even though we never have extra money. We're always kind of pressed for cash. And so those two things combined can make for a kind of a dangerous combination when you think the debt is cheaper than it actually is and that you're more capable of paying than you actually are.
Would a good example of this be the adjustable rate mortgages, the ARMs, that were really popular back in the early 2000s, where you had this sort of rush of people who were buying houses they probably couldn't afford because the rates were theoretically lower, but then also compounding that with this idea, well, by the time it adjusts up, I will have gotten a promotion at work or a raise or something like that.
Right. So most adjustable rate mortgages, first of all, the market data shows that they're most commonly used by people with lower means and often less financial sophistication. So why do people take out adjustable rate mortgages? Well, there's an introductory rate and monthly payment. A lot of people just think of the monthly payment when
Right.
they get the breakdown from the mortgage lender, and it's going to be less for the first 3 to 5 years, depending on the adjustable rate mortgage loan, than it would be for a traditional loan. And so when you put something off to 3 or 5 years, well, the rate could be anywhere when it unlocks. So let's say you've got a rate of 5% and in, let's say, 5 years, because I think the 5-year adjustable rate mortgage, it's a 30-year loan, but the first 5 years, you know what the rate is.
Typically set, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But at the end of that 5 years, it just unlocks and it can be wherever the market is, right?
Mm.
I think even the brightest minds of Wall Street couldn't tell you with any sort of confidence where interest rates will be in 5 years. But what we tend to tell ourselves is that, well, rates will be the same, maybe even lower, and I'll be making much more money, even though life is full of good surprises and bad. I have a bunch of degrees, I've worked hard, and I still got laid off from a job at one point. Stuff happens,
Yeah.
right? And the stuff that we tend to think that's going to happen is not the bad surprises, it's the good. It's, well, I'm sure I'll be CEO in 5 years and that sort of thing.
Well, and I think, yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of that internal psychological protection, right? That bad things happen to other people. And so I think, it's like even in today's kind of turbulent employment market that we have in the United States right now, I mean, I guess I would just candidly admit this for myself as like even though I know that's happening and there's layoffs happening and stuff,
Mm.
I for some inexplicable reason feel insulated from that, which doesn't actually jive with what could be reality. And so I'm probably just as guilty as anybody. I'm still making decisions in my financial life as if things will be the same, 3, 4 years down the road, which to your point might be true. I hope they are, but I guess it's possible they could be different at that point.
Right, right. Bad luck comes for us all at one point or another. As an older male, I watched lots of World War II documentaries, and I was watching one where they were talking about the D-Day landing, and they were briefing the soldiers. And of course, all the soldiers are like 18 to 20 years old.
Right.
So even though we all tend to be optimistic, the younger we are, the more optimistic we tend to be. And he said that in the briefing, the commanding officer said, 2 out of 3 of you are not coming back from this. And he said, I remember looking to the guy on either side of me and thinking, those poor bastards. Right, thinking
I'm the one out of 3.
I'm gonna get through it, and these poor guys are cooked,
Yeah.
right, when it's completely, random. Even the best soldiers, have a bad time.
So I bought my first condo during sort of the ARM rush, the adjustable rate rush. I didn't use an adjustable rate, but at the time, many of the people in my complex were buying it. And to your point, it was mostly younger people who probably would not have had the financial wherewithal to get a traditional mortgage. And so they ended up buying these condos that they could only afford in the perfect circumstance, right? The current movement or moment that they were in, any movement up or down in their income or any adjustment to that interest rate was basically going to be the death shot for them. And that's a lot of what caused the housing crash was this fact you had all these people really, really straddling that line.
Mm.
And as soon as it tipped, then it just collapsed, right? You had this whole, as soon as the rates went up a little bit, you had a whole swath of people essentially have to foreclose because they couldn't afford it. And so I think to your point, it is important for the listeners to understand that we have to give debt its proper perspective, right? We have to understand it could change on us or slide at any point in sort of the near or long term future.
Right, people avoid learning about finance the same way they may wanna avoid learning about nuclear physics, but the only difference is, well, you can lead a perfectly fulfilling life not knowing anything about nuclear
Right.
physics, but you are gonna be forced to engage with financial decisions, throughout your life, right? And it's better to get through the discomfort. Learning about anything is uncomfortable, right? Until you understand something, it's kinda irritating and uncomfortable, but if you do that work, you will understand that, okay, well, here are the places where debt makes sense. I mean, debt exists because it's a useful tool. The problem is, I guess, sort of our little pitfalls of human decision making sometimes gets us to make bad decisions on how to use it. We either take on too
Suboptimal.
much of it or take on overly expensive forms of it.
Yeah, I think your point about learning, I think is one of the critical pieces. It's one of the frustrations I have with professionals in my field. I argue and I get upset when we start to act like lawyers where we want this to be complicated because then you need us. And I think that does a disservice to people when whether or not you're going to hire a financial planner, and I think most people at some point should have the advice of a financial planner and should seek a professional just for even if it's just for a secondary opinion. But that doesn't absolve you of knowing enough about your own finances and being able to make intelligent decisions that because your financial planner is not going to be with you at the grocery store, right? Like, or wherever you're going to be making these choices. And so I think that we have to be increasing the literacy, but specifically around debt. We have to get away, and I'd love your opinion on this. I feel like we have to get away from this overly aggressive mindset of all debt is bad. That is simply not the way successful people have built their life in this country. And I think it's dangerous because then people put their head in the sand and don't want to learn about it.
Right, right. We were talking earlier, my son is in high school, and so he's taking a financial literacy class, and they're all reading books by, I believe you call him the Debt Crusader.
Yeah.
And so he comes out, and we've always, both my wife and I are kind of degree collectors. Like we've always, whenever we were unhappy with our jobs or, we would go back to school because I don't
Right.
know.
Reset the table.
Yeah, yeah, going to school is fun, or at least I think it is. And so he would come out of those classes convinced that, well, I'm not gonna, go to college, those people come out loaded with debt, and it's like, okay, well, Johnny, you have to remember education is still the greatest predictor of income long term,
Mhm.
right? So now we are saving to cover his undergraduate, but at the same time, even if we weren't, what it means is you just need to be thoughtful about how you approach your education. If you're going for a certain degree, does it make sense to take out X amount of debt, right? For medicine, you have a much higher threshold for
Sure.
what makes
To be a
sense
doctor.
versus like, social work. And we definitely need social workers. We probably need a lot more than we have. But unfortunately, those jobs don't pay as much as being in medicine or
Mhm.
some of these other fields, right? So you need to take these things into account.
Yeah, and I think that goes to our point about learning about debt and understanding the way it operates as opposed to just turning a blind eye to it and hoping it never exists. Because you may be making an investment using debt, in this particular case, student loans, in order to get a future payoff that's much greater. But if you just live a life where you say absolutely no debt of any kind is ever good, you're going to forego the possibility of the much higher income on the backside, at least potentially. And so I think that's what as we talk about this education side, is understanding debt as a tool, right? I mean, just like any other tool, it can be abused for sure. And we may get into that a little bit, but it is just something we have to sort of keep in mind as we go along, right?
Right. There's a recent study by some economists where they looked at how much people paid for their debt. Now, I think most people just get very anxious about finance in general. And so they get uncomfortable with it and they think of, well, the price you pay for debt sort of comes down from the heavens, from whatever body out there, and it's based on your credit score, probably, whatever your history is. And what the economists found was the greatest single determinant of how much you pay for your debt is not your credit score. It's how much effort you put into shopping for debt. So the more you work to find competitive prices, to talk to people, friends, or financial advisors who are more knowledgeable and more comfortable on the subject than you, if you have the courage and take the time, to learn and to get advice and to get competitive offers, you're going to do much better than someone who has a perfect credit score typically.
Yeah, because I mean, shopping your mortgage rate, whatever the case, but I mean, if you get and you and I, we could do the math, but a 0.5% or 1% on a mortgage is massive. I mean, you're talking
Yeah, over 30, but
dozens of
absurd.
thousands of dollars over 30 years. Yeah, that little extra couple hours of shopping around makes a huge difference. All right, well, we are going to take a quick break here with Dr. Dinsmore, and then we'll come back and follow up with some additional questions. All right, welcome back to Money Mixology. Again, I'm your host, Jason. I am here with my guest, Dr. John Dinsmore, and we're talking through some of the sort of intricacies of debt and specifically kind of how it's marketed to us. So, I do want to go into obviously, your book is called The Marketing of Debt. And so, I want to jump into that specific area. There are a lot of marketing tactics out there. And which one, when it comes to debt specifically, do you believe are either the most effective and or the most dangerous to the consumer?
Boy, there's a few. I mean, immediately I think of like credit card miles. Any of these little contests. I mean, you talk about Kohl's Cash, and it's a similar incentive thing, right? That you're sort of collecting points of some kind to achieve some sort of goal. And all the research on these, kind of loyalty or incentive programs show that do they affect our behavior? We tend to think they don't, but they really do. And there's a study I looked at where they looked at this isn't debt, but this is coffee. Buy 8 coffees, get your ninth
Oh,
coffee
yeah,
free.
frequent.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So, and what they see is that the closer people get to the accomplishment of that goal, the more they accelerate their purchases, right? So, which is probably fairly harmless for well, I don't get fancy coffee, so I'll say for a $3 cup of coffee. But when you're getting like 1 to 2% a value on all of your credit card purchases, and you're probably paying, what, 20 to 30% interest. I mean, it's kind of a joke. But people get really excited about
Mhm.
points, and so they start taking these things on, and they say, "Well, I get a free plane ticket if I spend this much more," and it's like, "Okay, well, you've taken on $20,000 worth of debt for a $2,000 plane ticket for a $200
Sure,
plane
okay.
ticket." So it doesn't really make sense. So that's a big thing, and ironically, one of the leading researchers on that, the New York Times, called him up to ask him, "Well, so with all your research on, like, credit card points, do you still have credit cards or credit cards with,
Miles or
with
whatever,
miles on
rewards.
them?" And he said, "Well, yes, I do." He's like, "'Cause I need the miles because I travel a lot." And it's like, "But you've dedicated your" and it's also fun, right?
Yeah.
It's fun to kinda win these prizes.
And
Yeah,
correct me if I'm wrong, because you teach marketing here. There's been a recent push to gamify a lot of these things, right? Like we want consumers to view purchasing decisions, things as a game because
right.
it switches the part of our brain. It's the entertainment zone as opposed to sort of the logic zone. And so you've seen a lot of this gamifying of this kind of stuff to where it just feels, to your point, sort of fun or exciting to do these kind of things.
Right, and when a lot of these things are app-based, right? So let's
Hmm.
say, you have your bank's app and notifications are enabled and, "Hey, it's double points today," or, these things when you have this, what does Jonathan Haidt call it? Sort of free, frictionless, and constant contact with marketers, they're able to stimulate these kinds of purchases, and you'll say, "Well, I'll pay it off later," or these things, but a lot of times people forget about it or they take on purchases that they can't pay off, that they have no choice. So the digital environment makes these things, we don't think about them as much. We are having more offers put to us. So we respond, we accept more of the offers. And this is all to their advantage and not to ours.
Yeah, because what frustrates me about those types of situations, and I sort of on one of my previous shows we talked about the Kohl's Cash, we joked about it, is the fact that like it's not that the Kohl's Cash itself is inherently bad. The problem is it's triggering you to make a purchase you had not intended to make. And so you're actively spending money because somebody else has convinced you to do so, as opposed to your internal control of saying, I need XYZ. And I think that's what ends up happening with a lot of these sort of constant contact type things is that, if you're on your way to work and you get this thing, oh, stop today and you get 2%. If you buy 17 coffees at Speedway, you get 6 cents back. And you're like, what? This makes no sense. But it feels like a reward, right? Which is a silly way to
Or an
think about it.
opportunity or whatever. Yeah.
Whatever. Yeah. So I think that's goofy. There's one that I can't even think what the name of it is. It's for gas. It's you get a card and you'll get like 2 cents back for or 5 cents back or something for every gallon that you use. And they people on on the commercial are like, I built up $700 last year. I'm like, what? No, you didn't. What'd you buy? 40,000 gallons of gas? Like the math does not work out at all on that.
Right, the math only works out on this stuff if you pay off your balance every month, and I
Mhm.
forget the percentage, but the majority of us don't, right?
Right.
So there's a guy online, he goes I think he just calls himself the points guy, and it's amazing, like, he is, doubled and tripled his points on his purchases by, and so he's constantly flying off to Singapore or wherever just based on points, but that only works if you pay off all of your debt every single month so you don't accrue interest, and I mean, credit cards are one of the more expensive forms of debt out there. So you are typically paying 20 to 30%
Mhm.
or more on
Well,
this debt.
and what's problematic there is it only takes one mistake, as in missed payment or whatever, or carrying a balance for a month or whatever, to completely undo all of that progress you had made, right? Or what you viewed as progress, right? So you go out, even if you're using credit cards responsibly and you're building up points in a responsible manner by paying off the credit card, you miss for 1 month and basically you've wiped out all of that quote unquote reward.
Right. I mean, paying off debt is hard. It's not, yeah, you're not irresponsible if you find it difficult to pay off debt because most people get into debt because they didn't have enough money to cover expenses in the first place. And so now you have to figure out how to meet your expenses and then pay off your debt. And that just takes a long time to do because most of us do not have incomes that escalate dramatically over a short period of time. It's usually like a long gradual build.
this isn't really our necessarily our topic for today, but this is why I get so frustrated with the cash into check places or check into cash, sorry, wrong way
Oh, yeah.
around, because of that the feedback loop that gets created, right? If I need to borrow at exorbitant interest rates, I mean, these are annual rates in the hundreds, and I need to borrow because I have an emergency and my paycheck won't cover it. Well, how in the world is my next paycheck that I'm giving to you? Now I'm again out of money. And so I get right back into the feedback loop. And so the people who have a payday advance loan or whatever you want to call it tend to have five of them because it's basically they have to keep going around in circles and the system will eventually collapse. And it's just that's frustrating that's an example of where I feel like as a society, we've let an industry run amok, right? It's damaging people and we know it's damaging people and we're not really doing anything to stop it.
Right, right. Well, and check cashing places, they are one of those signature businesses that when you see them, you know maybe you're not in the most affluent area. And there's a reason for that, right?
Mhm.
Well, there's a couple of reasons, I guess. One is a lot of folks in poorer areas, they have some understanding that these places are overly expensive, we'll say,
Predatory,
just
yeah.
to keep predatory is a better word, but they have no alternative, right?
Mhm.
Because there's no banking services available to them. There was a recent study where some economists looked at plasma banks, places where you can sell your blood, and what they found was if there was a plasma bank in a poorer neighborhood, it reduced the use of check cashing places by like 20% or something like that. So people have, even if they don't to the last penny understand all that they're being charged for these things, they have an understanding that it's not great.
That this is bad, yeah.
Right, right. And when given an alternative, they choose the alternative, in this case, selling their blood. But for a lot of folks, there's no alternative. One thing, so we were talking about marketing tactics, and with check cashing places, it really is kind of devious. But so you're required to at some point, some place in your marketing materials to say what your annual percentage rate
The
is
disclosure
for
box.
there's a disclosure box. Now, the law requiring you to do this was written in 68, I think. So this is
Something like that.
when, marketing materials were pamphlets or newspaper ads. So now we have the internet, and so they don't say where you have to put it. So something they'll do, a lot of people intuitively will say, all right, if I wanna go to a check cashing place and cash a $200 check, and let's say that the fee for it is like 25 bucks or something, which I don't think is unrealistic for those types
Oh,
of
sure.
places. You might, off the top of your head, say, "Okay, so that's what, like 12.5%." It is not, right? So it is
2 weeks or a week or whatever
a
it is.
week or 2 weeks, when you annualize that, it comes out to, like Jason
Yeah.
was saying, like 400% or something like
Mhm.
that, and once you start doing this, it sets a cycle in motion where this is where you're coming to cash your checks, and it's just vicious. Uh, the marketing tactic they use is, well, let's not call it an interest rate. Let's call it a convenience fee. And then we'll bury somewhere off in a dark closet in our marketing materials what the actual APR is that no one will ever look for. And so people say, well, it's basically a stiff ATM fee. No, it's not at
Yeah.
all, because they're calling it a convenience fee and making it as a flat price versus having a percentage rate and these things. It makes it harder for you to compare with other options, and it makes you think of it differently. And that's why people fall into it.
Well, I mean, we tend to view credit cards as bad because of their interest rates,
Right.
right? Well, as you've mentioned, I mean, bad credit card is going to be 25, 27%, something like that, versus 400. I mean, it's not even the same ball game that they're playing, right? And I think I always ask people, do you think they open like 30 of these in every city because they don't work? Right?
Right.
Like they're highly successful, highly lucrative. That's why you got them everywhere.
Right.
And what's frustrating for my other line of work, my full time job, I do deal with the state legislature quite a bit. And what's frustrating is that the check into cash type of payday loan industry, they're one of the biggest lobbyist groups in Ohio.
Right, because
They
they know that if people really had their say and really understood it, like, they would be cooked.
so they don't want that disclosure put to the front page, right? They want to be able to bury it in some back room closet. So, yeah, I think those are really problematic. What else do we have out there that would be tactics that marketers are using that doesn't have to be bad? I mean, they just are effective.
Right, right. So, one thing is if you delay payments on things, if things move into the future even just a little bit.
Hyperbolic discounting.
Right, right. So, people think of it as dramatically different in terms of their ability to afford it, like, even if it's just, like, a couple of months. So, A lot of people, if you go furniture is expensive, right? So if you wanna go get some furniture for your house, a lot of these places will have no payments for 6 months or something like that, and that get puts us into a totally different mindset about, "Oh, this thing that I have no real possibility of paying for today, or even starting payments for today, 6 months, it's gonna be cool."
I'll basically be Bill Gates in 6 months, yeah.
Right, and it makes like it doesn't feel sinister, and I don't think it probably is for the people who are doing it, but it has this effect, right? I mean, the marketer looks at it and says, this helps stimulate sales because we are lowering the barrier to acquisition." Okay, but they're also signing up for a 5-year commitment to pay off, this
A
furniture.
diminishing asset,
Right, that
essentially.
they're not gonna feel upfront, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's part of what is frustrating for people's like you and I sitting in our seats here is that there are a handful of items we buy that we have traditionally bought on debt that like cars and houses, for example, that people might still make suboptimal choices. They might buy a car that's too expensive, but they do go in knowing there's going to be a monthly payment, knowing that there's going to be some pain there, right? The problem is that there's all these new things like furniture and jewelry, and now you can do that the 4 payment system for pretty much anything, buy a new pair of shoes and you buy 4 payments on your new Nikes, like, there's all these new things, and I don't know that the public consciousness has caught up to the fact that we're financing these things, right? Like, that it's the same as what you're doing with your car, but you're doing it for shoes that'll be worn out before you're even finished paying for them.
Right.
Right, so I think that's really where it becomes problematic for me as a planner.
Right. Well, and most of us think we know how interest rates work, and studies show most of us don't. Right. And what studies also show is for the people who actually do understand interest rates, they take on less debt than people who don't. So you do see this. The folks who are taking on the worst financial products are the folks who understand them the
And
least
who can least afford them.
and who can least afford them typically, right? So typically, if you are of lower means, you probably have had less education or mentorship in the personal finance and that sort of thing. And, people selling these products as a result know to target, all the check cashing places you see in poorer neighborhoods. That's why. They know where their market is. You could intuitively say as a marketer, well, we want to cash checks. Maybe richer folks cash more checks than poorer folks. Maybe we should locate there. It's like, no, they're never in a million years. They're never
They
going to use this
they direct
service.
deposit to their bank. All right, well, we're gonna take a quick break here for a couple minutes, and then we'll be back to finish up our conversation. All right, welcome back to Money Mixology. My name's Jason, here with my guest, Dr. John Dinsmore. We were just chatting at the break about something I found was really interesting, and so let me set the table for a second. On my therapy background, I often run into clients who have poverty mindset. So they were raised in an environment of lower means, and it has conditioned them psychologically to some certain things. For example, they will only buy name brands at the store because the store brand is what poor people buy, and I don't want to be a poor person, even though wealthy people buy store brands. So there's this kind of catch in the system, if you will. You mentioned something really interesting about credit cards, specific styles of credit cards.
Right. So we're all probably familiar with like the Amex Black Card or their Gold or Platinum Card, and these were credit cards that came out I think they started in the 50s and were legitimately targeted to people of higher means, right? But these cards became such status symbols that they immediately went kind of super viral, right? So a bunch of other credit card companies started mimicking the approach, even including so when I say like a subprime credit card, it's a credit card for someone with bad credit and might even be like prepaid and targeted to someone of lower means, poorer folks, but still branding them platinum, diamond, whatever, right? So what they found and the reason why, I mean, like you talking about check cashing places, why are they there? Because it works, right? So
Mhm.
why are these luxury branded credit cards being targeted to people not in a luxury market because they love them, right? And it's I think especially in this country, right, where economic status is such a big consideration.
Sure.
So if you're of lower economic status, well, you probably carry that weight around with you even beyond it being harder to pay for things, right? It's just you feel like you are maybe sort of lower ranking in society. And so what studies have shown is lower income folks who have these luxury branded credit cards tend to use them more often, especially if they're using them in front of people whose opinion of them matters, right? We call it a socially visible consumption. With if someone who has been struggling with low economic status gets this signal of kind of high economic status, they kind of want to use
Oh,
it
show it
and
off.
show it off as often as they can. And of course, because these subprime credit cards are even more expensive than regular credit cards, being used by people even less capable of paying off debt than some others, it's just a really bad combination.
This is a random example, from I used to way long time ago, I worked in the auto industry. I worked for International Truck, but we had partnerships with, at the time, Chrysler. It's now changed, obviously, Daimler, but we or Stellantis, whatever it is now. But at the time, was I was there when Chrysler redid the Chrysler 300, and they specifically modeled it after the luxury cars, like the Rolls Royces and the more expensive Caddies and things like that, because they were not targeting wealthy people to buy that car. They were targeting lower income people who would view it as an expensive car, even though it's a Dodge or Chrysler, whatever you want to call it. So it was just an example of sort of this idea of influencing people that you can get false status, I suppose.
Right, it's like a
Uh,
counterfeit Gucci bag or
yeah,
something,
right.
yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. Okay, so kinda shifting gears just a little bit, I do, part of the show is explaining to people what's happening and how this is playing out in the real world, but also trying to give them some tools, some counter arguments to this thing. How do I protect myself? So as a consumer, are there steps I can take to be aware of the marketing that's happening to me, to prevent it as much as I can? What are your thoughts there?
Right, so, I mean, I think, when I think of some of the truly terrible financial decisions that I've made, it usually comes from maybe 2 things. One is not doing the work to really understand what I was getting into. I think the first time I ever bought a car by myself, I was so excited to be buying a car, and I went in and I picked out the car. It was an Isuzu Rodeo, just awful car, it turned out, but I was very excited, and then, the salesperson said, "Well, do you need a loan for this?" And I was like, "You can do that for me?" Right? Like, I had not looked around at all, and then once it was too late, I realized it was the same as putting on a credit card. I think I was paying 12% on my car loan or something like that. It was
Oof.
just terrible, right? So, um, you know, do the work and educate yourself and, get help, right? So, it's good financial education is important. Studies have shown that over time, the effects of financial education fade, right? Because if you're not working in finance, you're not immersed in it. And how often do most normal folks buy a house or a car? Not that often, right?
Right.
So you have to kind of refresh yourself or get help from someone who is maybe more immersed or more comfortable in the topic. But pride is going to kill you in these circumstances where if you feel like, no, I got it, I understand it, and you really don't. And as a teacher, there's lots of times where I look out to my students and like, do you understand? And they'll be nodding. And I'll be like, okay,
You don't get this,
you don't get
right.
this at all, right? Let's go back over it. So have the courage to get the help and information that you need. So that's one thing. The other thing is a lot of marketers' tactics will use time pressure. If you act in the next 10 minutes and so on and so forth. And I think if we're anxious about finance, which most of us are, um, I probably the worst financial decision I ever made in my life. I
Kids.
Well, that's not yeah, I was a great decision. Yeah, definitely
Great decision, just
not
not
so my wife and I, we were engaged at that point, and we were moving to Richmond, Virginia, and I was working for a real estate firm that was maybe a little shady, a real estate developer, and so one of the owners said, "Hey, if you're gonna get a mortgage, you gotta go to my friend Steve." And so I go to Steve. So he gets it all set up, and so I just changed jobs, which can be a little weird for underwriting, and they were paying me as a contractor, not an
Oh,
employee,
yeah,
which
okay.
makes it even weirder,
Right.
right? He's like, "No, it's all good. It's all good." So we get everything set up to buy this house. So Alyssa is in DC. I'm staying with my parents in Virginia Beach. And to close the house, it's like, what, 30 to 60 days, depending on how things go, right?
Inspection.
And so we're all waiting for this thing to happen. And about a week beforehand, Steve says, there's a problem with the underwriting. I can get you a loan, but it's something, I don't know if they still have them. They were called no doc loans. This is
Oh,
back during the housing bubble,
yeah.
where it was, we'll give you a loan, and you don't have to provide any proof of income.
Giant credit card.
Right, and so I was like, "But I don't wanna be homeless. I've already been waiting for almost 2 months for this thing, so I guess we have to do it." I just felt, um, I felt stuck. And so we went ahead and did the loan. I refinanced a couple of years later, but I think it ended up costing us like over the course of the 2 years, like an extra
Ooh,
$30,000. Now, and really, while Steve was not a upstanding member of the financial community, we'll say, I bear some of the blame because I felt stuck and I didn't ask around, and probably there would have been some other lenders who would have been chomping at the bit, or at least I should have threatened to walk away from Steve and see if he, because I had a similar experience later and I started to walk away, and that mortgage broker all of a sudden had way better
magic numbers,
yeah,
yeah. Well, there was a lot of stuff there, right? I mean, that experience is pure psychology. I mean, first of all, you're under sunk cost pressure as well, right?
right,
We've already committed to this, and that's one of the things that's really dangerous for people is you have to understand it doesn't actually matter what's happened in the past, and everybody's guilty of this, myself
right,
included. It's
yeah.
very difficult, but you have to understand, like, would you make this decision today? Based on the information you have right now, would you make the decision again? If you wouldn't, then what happened, no matter how much loss you've had, it doesn't matter. It's gone. And so that's really tough for people. In your case, you had 60 days of cost
I
essentially.
would thought everything was just peachy
Yeah.
keen.
So I think that's really difficult. I also think it's an example of not that you were poor at the time, but the expression is it's very expensive to be poor. And if you had in that scenario, if you had had a large cash reserve and more financial wherewithal, you could have withstood that storm easier and gotten into a better position, right? You could have said, "Well, never mind, I don't want this loan. Then I'll go to a conventional lender and put more money down and get a better loan or whatever." And so I think those are really tough when people are stuck in these situations because you're right. It's that feeling of being stuck. It's the check cashing problem. It's the
Right.
reason people use credit cards for medical emergencies. When you feel stuck, it becomes difficult to find your way out of that wilderness without overusing financial tools that are not designed to do what you're asking it to do. So, okay. So what else? I mean, we've got are there other things we should be aware of? So time constraint for sure, or
Time
time pressure.
constraint, anytime something is oh, in a lot of kind of more financial products targeted to like bigger purchases, whether it's furniture, a car, or a house, or things like that. Uh, you know, they are required to disclose all the fees and that sort of. But they, as a general rule in marketing, if there's something you want people to not notice or understand, you strive for complexity. If there's something you do want them to understand or pay attention to, you go for simplicity, right?
Right.
So in the check cashing place, we call it a convenience fee. It's right up front, and we get put all the focus there, and then we'll hide all the other
Real
stuff in the back
APR.
closet.
Right.
So it is, people don't read the fine print or ask for or go for the breakdown of all the fees and that sort of thing because there's lots of financial products where you have a low APR, but then you have all these other things and escalation clauses and that sort of thing. So I think a lot of it is, again, don't be afraid or uncomfortable in asking.
Do you like, let's use a car purchase as an example. I tend to favor and recommend to people they go to their bank ahead of time.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
because the problem with going to the dealership, there's a various issues with just sort of we'll say, upstanding citizenship of the car dealerships. But
Right.
beyond that, it is super hard to make a better financial decision when you've suddenly gotten in that new car and it's got the new car smell and the stereo is
And you've been
nicer
looking
and
for days and you finally decided, yeah.
correct, and you're just like, so whatever fees they throw on that page probably don't matter to you as much because you really wanna leave that dealership with that new car, and I think that can be problematic. You've walked yourself into a bad situation.
Right, right. Well, and there is some time pressure and a lot of things we've talked about. So a couple years ago, my wife's car just died. Like she came out from lunch and there was fluid all over the parking
Oh,
lot, and we had it towed to the dealership, and they were like, "We could fix it," and I think they said for like $12,000. So I was like, "Well, obviously we're not doing that." And so we go out to go car shopping, and we get a car that has a reputation for reliability, right? So one of those brands. And the whole sales pitch is, "Oh, you're gonna have this thing forever. Your kids will drive this car. It's so reliable. It's so safe," and all these things. And then the moment you've signed off on it, then they start hitting you with a, "But stuff could go wrong," That's like, these things aren't free to fix. And you're like, "Wait, you were saying that," right? And I think and typically because, these the car is the second biggest purchase most people make,
Mhm.
right? And so you put a lot of time and energy into looking for it as you should. But once you've finally decided and they start trying to hit you with all these things, if you're not sure, you can always say, "Hey, look," just say, "No right now, but if I reconsider tonight, can I come back tomorrow and sign up for the extended warranty?" The last car I got, they said, "Well, we have an undercarriage treatment," and it was like 900. And I was like, "Okay, well, how long does it take to put it on?" They're like, 10 minutes. And I was like, "Why is it 900 bucks?"
$900, right, yeah.
Right? Of all these things, because they're gonna throw a lot at you. Uh, just if you're not sure or you're just feeling too tired and confused, just
Go
defer. Just
home.
say, "Look, no for now, but, if I reconsider, can I come back and sign on?" And they will be thrilled if you come back to sign up for it. So, but don't, kinda don't play their game. If pressure is being applied to you, it's for a reason and it's
Right.
not to your benefit.
Yeah, so I have a good friend that owns a lot of car dealerships. You would know the name, and he openly acknowledges they make 17 to 20% of their profit off of the stuff they sell you in the finance office. It's
Yep.
not that is not a finance person that's running that show. It's a salesperson who's dressed up as a finance manager.
Right.
And so they're selling you products. And yeah, you do have to be careful. I recommend to all of my clients the cooling off period. And I on this show I have recommended a number of times you should have clearly established timelines based on the size of the purchase. So if it's a $10 purchase, who cares? Make the purchase. But if it's a $100 purchase, it's a 24-hour waiting period or whatever. If it's a car, right? I'm going to force myself to wait 3 days or whatever the case may be,
Right.
whatever you and your spouse feel is appropriate, because then it will remove a lot of that emotional drive and that
Right.
time pressure, right? And you'll get a chance to step back. I also think that you mentioned people not being very good at interest rates. I don't think that they're actually able to do trade-offs very well financially either.
Right.
So the example I have is I have a Tesla, and when I went to purchase it, I knew I wanted a Tesla. I had done a ton of research. I wasn't worried about that piece, but the sale that they were trying to make was, well, you'll make up the difference in gas. And when you run the math on that.
They're Tesla is very creative on their math.
Correct, yes, and so when you run the math on it, you're like, "Okay, yeah, I mean, I'll save a couple $100, but this car is 400 a month more than a regular car or whatever, and
Right.
so I'm not making up this kinda difference," right? Like, on the S model, which I don't have, but the S model is $100,000.
Right.
How much gas am I saving to pay off the $60,000 extra money for the car? Like, it's just
Right.
crazy.
Well, and we talk about the changing of, like, the framing of the expense of it.
Mhm.
So, with anything that's financed, they do this with cars, they do it with houses. They're like, "Oh, well, it's only comes out to 8 extra dollars a month," right? Or whatever it is. So but if you multiply times the payments and all that stuff, so that's one thing. The other thing is if you try and sell that car or sell that house, especially for a house, because the mortgage is all interest for the first,
For
like, 15 years or whatever. Most people don't think of, "Okay, if this is rolled into what I'm paying for the house, this means that when I eventually sell this
You
thing,
gotta pay it off.
yeah, I'm getting less money from the proceeds of the house." Like, it's real money, and it's real money that you're paying interest on over the
Mhm.
long term. But when you hear, it's $8 a month," I mean, yeah, it's like a latte or whatever. But it's real money over the long term.
Well, cars are notorious, they sell the payment. That is their whole shtick, right?
Right.
They don't sell people on the cost of a car. Because if you went to a Honda dealership and a Honda Civic, fully loaded with, sort of all your fees and all that delivery charges and all that nonsense, tax and everything, if they were like, "Oh, this car is $42,000, please write us a check," you'd be like, "Are you out of your mind?"
Right.
But when they're like, "Oh, well, we can make it, $75 a month." I mean, it's for the next 42 years, and you're like, "Oh, okay, 75 bucks a month." We are very bad at like, it's called hyperbolic discounting. The farther you put something in the future, less we care about it, right?
Right.
And so we're just not good at it inherently. So I do wanna finish, up today, our last couple minutes. Are there policies or laws that you believe we as a society should be considering in order to help control some of these issues?
Right. So, as I mentioned earlier, so the big law that affects financing and lending is the Truth in Lending Act, and that was 1968, right? How different is the world now than it was in 1968? Something we desperately need is so lenders are required to present information in annualized interest. There's not really much of they don't say where. It doesn't have to be next to, we're going to check cashing the convenience fee. Oh, by the way, this is actually 450%
Right.
annually, right? There needs to be some rules about that. You can't just, I mean, especially with the internet, right? You can't just bury it in some, when I was writing the book to look up the annualized costs, I mean, it took some effort to
And you're
get
actively
to
looking
these
for it.
right, mandated disclosures,
Yeah.
and most people are not gonna dedicate, the effort to that. So that's one thing. Something else I looked at, in particular for people who are in poorer areas and don't have any, like, mainstream financial institutions available to them, one of the th that a couple of things that I've seen done in other countries. So one is, and I think it was in India, and where they had a similar thing. So, like, if you're in Mumbai, there's banks all over the place. But, if you're out in the country or in a poor
You're
area, there's just
underbanked.
nothing, right? You're going to similar, institutions. They would force, if you're going to get a permit in a mainstream area, you're going to have to open a location in a lower
Oh, okay, yeah,
yeah, put it in New York. So you want to be in Manhattan? Great. Well, you have to open a branch in the Bronx or maybe up in rural upstate New York, where people don't have access to, like,
this services.
market rate
Yeah,
services. The other thing that has been done in other countries is, and there's good market reasons for a lot of these places not locating in poorer neighborhoods,
sure.
right?
They still have to
Just
run a
intuitively,
business.
right?
Yeah,
But what tends to be in every community are certain government offices like DMVs or social security
sure.
offices and things like that. And these things can provide storefronts to market rate services. So you go to the DMV and maybe, the state of Ohio partners with Bank of America and Fifth Third and some others. The DMV is the location and they have the storefront to it, but they're actually so
Because they
these are
have the physical
this can
space.
increase access to cheaper financing services for folks.
Awesome. Well, I sincerely appreciate you being here today. This has been fantastic. I love talking about sort of the marketing side of things because we do want people making better decisions as we go and being caught off guard with a lot of these frankly predatory type of tactics is troubling and it's difficult. So I want people to be aware of them. As always, if you have any questions or comments, or you just are concerns about things that came up during the show and you want more information, you can email us at info@moneymixology.com. I want to thank my guest, Dr. John Dinsmore. Please go get his book. That would be awesome. You'll get a chance to learn more about this topic. And I appreciate you being here. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jason.
Everybody have a wonderful day.